In the North Ocean, the team of the Kinloch Bravo oil rig is preparing to return home following quite a while of difficult work at long last. Sadly, Magnus, the apparatus director, is getting a call from the organization with terrible news. The helicopters are redirecting to assist the North Kulsker stage with its power disappointment, so they don't have any idea when they'll have the option to get Magnus's group. Magnus needs to request more subtleties, yet the telephone abruptly quits working. Correspondences begin falling all once again the structure. Heckle with her significant other freezes, and Falmer can't make the really radio work by the same token. Magnus requires a gathering and declares that they'll need to stand by some time to return home. This isn't generally welcomed by anybody, particularly not by Lars, who continues to request appropriate clarifications. Unexpectedly, the power goes out in the entire structure, and Falmer finds all generators are down. The battery reinforcement is holding things up for the present, and the creation module's holding its tension, however, assuming it spikes it could kill them all. Falmer attempts to reach out to the reserve vessel, however the radio actually isn't working, and the other oil stage close to them is by all accounts experiencing a similar difficulty. The entire apparatus starts shaking, and the creation module is lighting to burst into flames, gaining out of influence. Rose, the organization agent, doesn't have any desire to close it down yet in light of the fact that they'll be off-track quantity, however Magnus orders his men to close down the module at any rate for their lives. At that point, the entire apparatus starts shaking once more. Everybody gazes in shock when they notice an extremely thick and quick haze wrapping the whole structure. Minutes after the fact, Falmer figures out how to bring power back, yet correspondences are still off, and it's basically impossible that the choppers will come in this climate. Alwyn contemplates whether they have and guarantees it doesn't work that way. Magnus thinks fixing correspondences is their need, so he sends Falmer and Boz to beware of the radio pinnacle. At the point when they come to the top, Falmer starts really looking at the machine, yet he blows his top when Boz blames him for selling out the group for getting into a relationship with Rose, who is on the organization's side and not theirs. Boz rapidly apologizes, and when Falmer relinquishes him, he moves to get something and tracks down a dead seagull on the floor. Magnus and Lars are holding up at the foundation of the pinnacle when unexpectedly they see Boz fall. Feline and Rose race to the scene with a clinical unit, while Falmer descends too, making sense if he doesn't have the foggiest idea what happened in light of the fact that Boz had been right behind him. Lars has zero faith in his story since he sees Boz's outfit was unclipped. Feline takes Bax to the clinical inlet and settles him, yet there's nothing else she can manage without a medical procedure room. Lars begins losing it since it's absolutely impossible that choppers will come in time. Rose carries Magnus to the PC to show him that the pipelines have no strain, and that implies every one of the apparatuses in the space are having similar difficulty as them. Minutes after the fact, Boz awakens and starts having dreams of things breaking apart under the ocean. Lars goes to Magnus's office to fault him for everything, except Magnus overlooks the grumblings and leaves. This permits Lars to sneak about his work area and found a confidential notice from the organization that makes him irate. He assembles everybody on the helideck to illuminate them the board has been deceiving them all along. Magnus comes over as well and sees Lars has the notice, so he needs to admit that the organization's throwing out the entire field and everybody will lose their positions soon. The discussion's out of nowhere hindered by something falling on them. It's debris, despite the fact that they aren't remotely close to a spring of gushing lava. Boz appears at the helideck also and reports that it's past a point of no return, it's now begun prior to dropping. Afterward, Boz awakens in the hospital and makes sense if he doesn't recall the mishap or the helideck. At the pinnacle, he saw something in the haze and heard a commotion in his mind. Boz responds fiercely when Feline attempts to take blood and hollers at them for not paying attention to his alerts since there's a wave coming. After Feline figures out how to make it lights out time for him, she clarifies for Rose that Boz's injuries are some way or another rapidly recuperating all alone. When the ladies are gone, Boz uncovers he's actually alert, and when he checks his wounds, he sees a few shining spores dealing with shutting them. In the rec room, the team sees a few lights by the window. It's the reserve vessel, which is attempting to convey yet an addition heading down some unacceptable path. Alwyn sends Lek outside to get the Morse message, and they find the vessels requesting help. Magnus orders Falmer to sign back to them utilizing the deck lights to figure out what they know, then he goes to see Cook Murch to request that he begin proportioning their food. Lars is beginning to go off the deep end since he was secured in his room with Easter watching the entryway. In the hospital, Boz awakens again to see a large portion of his wounds are mended, and when he checks his appearance, he starts having a dream of the apparatus being obliterated. Then he escapes to his room and keeping in mind that getting dressed, he starts wriggling in torment as his mouth pushes out his gold tooth. Rose assembles a debris to investigate it and orders everybody to remain inside. Falmer illuminates her and Magnus that the vessel doesn't have more data than they do. They don't have correspondences either, so assuming that they trust that morning will come, they will not have the option to utilize the lights to direct them in, and the boat could crash. In the event that they empty it ought to be currently, yet Rose would rather not on the grounds that it could cause them problems for breaking the agreement. However, Magnus's need is everybody's well-being, and he requests that Falmer keep the lights to gradually direct the vessel. Alwyn goes outside to assume control over Lex's shift and finds Boz drawing unusual circles on a window. At the point when he keeps an eye on him, Boz makes sense of his head is brimming with commotion and that he shouldn't have endured the mishap. Something is most certainly not ordinary about this present circumstance. The lights in the room begin gleaming, and Boz has one more strange vision prior to taking off. Lars begins dealing with the window and figures out how to take it crazy to get away. Lex slips into the hospital to take the scouring liquor to become inebriated, then attempts to have a shower. At that point his body starts harming everywhere, and as Lex hurls blood, the ink of his tattoos begins to fall off his skin. When Heather tracks down him, he's now dead. At the point when Feline comes to mind him, she can't determine what killed him, yet when Dunlin appears with Boz's tooth, she's certain there's something pushing inorganic material out of their bodies. In the control room, Falmer sees a light on the extension that doesn't come from the vessel. He and Alwyn go outside to look at it, yet Lars sees them and switches off his electric lamp before they can get him. He slips back inside the structure through the entryway they utilized and locks it, chancing upon Heather on the way. Falmer and Alwyn check the rowboats in the event that anybody is attempting to escape, and Falmer unintentionally wounds his hand. At that point, the debris bafflingly quits falling. Lars goes to the control room and starts flagging SOS with the lights, making the vessel come at max throttle. Alwyn and Falmer see the message and attempt to get back inside, however the entryway's locked, so Alwyn goes searching for one more entry, while Falmer continues to yell. Heather hears him and carries Magnus to help her open the entryway. Falmer informs them regarding Lars, and they hurry to stop him, practically beginning a fistfight before Magnus requests that they focus on making an impression on the vessel to address its course. Alwyn's right now following a few lights glimmering that lead him to Boz, who will not return, since he really wants to see the existence in the water that began everything. Alwyn demands and makes Boz snap, snatching Alwyn and making him ramble water through his mouth. Dunlin shows up to caution them about an approaching wave brought about by the boat taking a different path, so Boz drops Alwyn and takes off. Dunlin hauls Alwyn's body away from the water, and Magnus comes to assist with CPR, yet all at once it's past the point of no return. At the point when Feline shows up, she affirms Alwyn some way or another suffocated. Rose keeps on concentrating on the debris, and when she drops a touch of blood on it, she affirms there are living life forms in it. She goes to see Magnus, who illuminates her the vessel left to help another apparatus first. Rose carries him and Feline to her office to make sense of the debris, has some sort of parasitic spore that is searching for hosts, and it fixes their injuries rapidly on the grounds that it needs a sound body. They need to stay away from long openness to the debris and watch out for individuals with serious injuries. Magnus approves Rose to take blood tests from the entire group to contrast them with what they have from Boz. In the rec corridor, Heather sees the mist is at last disappearing, and the adjoining rig has totally been obliterated. Falmer finds Boz seeing Rose's examination and attempts to offer assistance, yet Boz declines on the grounds that the light necessitates him. Rose shows up as well and sees Boz has taken his own blood test, so when she requests his collaboration, he takes off. At the point when Magnus finds out about what occurred, he sends Feline to mind everybody that has wounds, since they can't do the testing any longer. Subsequent to separating Falmer, Magnus requires another gathering. Presently the haze and debris are gone. He maintains that around 50% of the group should sanitize the apparatus completely, and the other half should track down Boz. Rose keeps researching and finds the spores have been seen before fossilized in layers of earth. They ought to have been kicked the bucket with the dinosaurs, yet penetrating so profound has awoken a resting home. Outside, Boz is tossing his blood test into the ocean. His body is completely recuperated now, and he contacts the tanks of water as a test, in a split second filling them with spores. He stows away when he hears James searching for him, yet when James sees the spored water and calls for help, so Boz needs to quiet him down. Lars and Dunlin come to the room and find James on the floor. Lars sees the spores in the water have begun to develop plants. In the hardware room, Heather, Easter, and Murch likewise find plants developing on the oil. Unexpectedly the apparatus begins shaking once more, and Dunlin acknowledges James is dying. At the point when the kid opens his hand, he uncovers he lost a tooth, he's tainted to mean. Frightened, James hits Dunlin and takes off. The apparatus begins losing power once more, so Magnus removes Falmer from detachment to make him fix it. Heather sees Boz and follows him into the mud pit, where Boz is developing plants out of control. Boz makes sense of 1 million-year-old memory has let him know he wants to guard this spot, since it's being gone after, assuming it kicks the bucket everybody will go down with it. Unexpectedly James shows up too on the grounds that he's joined Boz's objective. The remainder of the group understands Heather's gone, and Lars acts the hero here, making Boz and James take off before Heather can find more solutions. Falmer figures out how to re-establish power, and the group finds the flare on the creation module is no more. They need to detach it from the power framework to prevent it from detonating, yet the module control is in the mud pit where they could be contaminated by the spores. Their main choice is to reignite the flare physically, and Falmer acknowledges to face the challenge. Easter controls the crane to carry Falmer nearer to the module, yet it's sufficiently not. Subsequently, Falmer unclips his saddle and comes as close as workable for a legitimate shot. The flare is turned on again effectively, however Falmer's hit by the fire and must be taken to the clinic to deal with a few serious consumes on his back. In the mud pit, Boz's dreams deteriorate and he reaches the resolution they need to close down the apparatus's framework to stop the assault. James attempts to close the valve, yet the lines are as yet forced and they could explode, so they will get to the framework from the source. Afterward, after a visit from Rose, Falmer swears he feels fine and gets dressed in light of the fact that he needs to help. He, Rose, and Heather start cooperating on the exploration, and Falmer unwittingly draws a few circles on a cushion like Boz used to. Abruptly, Magnus calls them all to the control room, where he's found the tension is inconceivably high on the grounds that Boz is attempting to sidestep the safeguards for the well. Falmer can't remove control from him from a distance, so they should face a challenge with the bullseye ROV. Easter aids the ROV and gets submerged pictures showing that the tremors have made a progression of circles on the land that help Falmer to remember his drawings. The ROV cautiously moves toward the wellhead and turns it down, making Boz irate in light of the fact that his arrangement has fizzled. He attempts to get to the framework straightforwardly from the central processor, yet it has an alert on it, so they need Falmer to cripple it. Out of nowhere, Easter's telephone receives a message, and the group finds interchanges are back. Magnus attempts to contact the Coast Guard, and Falmer researches the importance behind circles that appear to be conveying something. Rose scans the organization's framework for certain compartments Heather found and no one knew about, just to find an undertaking called Sirene that she can't get to. She additionally tracks down Falmer's drawings. Whistles her better half, who makes sense of the organization, told the families the group's fine and that they've additionally been having electrical issues. At that point, the haze shows up in the city, and presently individuals ashore are the ones without power. Web signal goes down, and the watchman doesn't receive Magnus's messages requesting help. Boz utilizes his spore's powers to interface with Falmer's body, which starts mending all the more rapidly. Falmer likewise starts hearing Boz's voice in his mind, so he hurries to the washroom to see his injuries. Rose sees he's missing and goes to keep an eye on him, frightening Falmer in light of the fact that briefly, he sees Boz in the mirror. He admits all that to Rose, who kisses him to comfort him. This makes Falmer have a dream of her misery, and Boz is phantom requesting that he go along with him. Hours after the fact, Rose minds Falmer once more, just to find Anodi abandoned. Rosa pursues him and Feline joins her. Together they find Falmer going to the mud pit. The young ladies enter the pit as well, and the spores approach Feline yet don't assault, rather they circle her stomach since they're interested about the child. Rose hauls Feline out before it deteriorates, and they find the team getting invigorated on the grounds that there's a progression of lights moving toward the apparatus. It's a boat coming from the adjoining rig. The team gets the survivors and Rose meets Coke, who works for the organization's examination division, and requests to be taken to the control room right away. Feline minds different men to ensure there aren't any wounds, and Easter's astonished to see his past love interest Harish among them. Coke makes sense of his apparatus detonated after a strained disappointment and thinks they need to focus on returning access once again to the creation module. Rose needs to know why Coke had been shipped off the apparatus, however he will not make sense of. In the clinic, Harish recounts Easter an alternate story. At the point when Coke showed up at the apparatus, he sent a lot of individuals home, and the rest needed to assist him with introducing some new gear. They weren't drawing oil up from the well, they were sending something down. Then the mist came in and individuals began to vanish, however Coke kept composed as though he had done this previously. He continued pushing the hardware test and overlooking the tension alerts until the apparatus detonated. Heather enters the framework to cross-check the rundown of survivors with the group records, yet she can't track down Coke's name. She enlightens Easter and Harish regarding this, and Harish makes sense of Coke had been getting to the framework with a transitory record the fellow made when he showed up. Before they left the apparatus, he cleaned everything connected with the test. Heather checks the framework, and Harish focuses at a weird name on the group list that wasn't there previously. There are messages let the organization know that the living being has previously spread, and that implies Coke's constantly known, and the organization sent him deliberately. Feline minds Rose and thinks the circles she's concentrating on seem to be a tree, causing Rose to understand this might be the means by which the spores monitor time. The hole between the rings denotes the 5 significant mass elimination occasions, and that implies the last ring is the present and is quitting for the day to obliterate them. Coke makes sense of that in his apparatus. The blast had been brought about by the contaminated individuals, opening the well to explode it. He needs to send a group to the creation module, yet Magnus will not face that challenge, and Rose surmises that multitude of holders and the testing are the mystery venture Siren. Falmer at last joins Boz and James, however he sees his brain is more clear than his companions. Boz makes sense if he hasn't been presented to the spores sufficiently long yet, however they'll take over soon. Boz can assist him with tackling them assuming Falmer acknowledges to manage the framework. Falmer starts to work yet it'll require a significant stretch of time to close down the caution. Dunlin, Lars, and Murch assemble Coke for a confidential conference since they're tired of Magnus's terrible choices and need to hear Coke's thoughts. Coke makes sense if they can stop Boz by utilizing the carbon dioxide from the mysterious holders to wreck him. It's simply a question of entering the mud pit and interfacing the carbon dioxide to the ventilation framework. The triplet gets the canisters from the compartments and Dunlin gets dubious on the grounds that the mark says the carbon dioxide's blended in with something different. They take the canisters to the mud pit and interface them to the ventilation shafts, safeguarding themselves with veils. Boz sends James and Falmer to actually take a look at what's happening, and James tracks down the triplet first, just to hurl blood on them out of nowhere. The folks understand the carbon dioxide isn't taking James out, it's killing him and the plants, since that was Coke's arrangement from the start. Lars and Murch take off, however Dunlin doesn't go along with them until he's certain James can be saved. Falmer attempts to stop the ventilation, however both he and Boz drop. In the control room, Feline finds Coke closing down the entryways around the mud pit after Lars and Murch circumvent, catching Dunlin inside. Dunlin's cover runs out of oxygen and he passes on as well. Heather and Harish inform Rose and Magnus concerning Coke and go to face him, yet Coke protects his activities as endurance. Magnus opens the entryways yet he can't gain admittance to the ventilation pits, so Rose goes down there and takes a cover from Lars to enter the mud pit. She closes down the ventilation physically and afterward minds Falmer, who doesn't awaken when Rose shares the cover. Anyway, when she coincidentally contacts the plants, the spores respond and take Falmer back to cognizance. They get away from the pit together, while Boz additionally awakens and the last ring closes submerged. Magnus meets with Harish to hear the genuine story. Coke stretched the testing to the edge since he needed to obliterate the spore, losing the apparatus was simply blow back to make do. The vessel acted to hero them, however it crashed, so they cleaned the framework and moved away on a little raft, meaning they abandoned individuals to bite the dust. A short time later, Magnus examines Coke, who makes sense of this has all been organization strategy. They would rather not lose their valuable oil holds, they simply need to continue to bore without interferences. Subsequently Coke was shipped off kill the spore. On the off chance that they don't stop it presently, it'll spread everywhere. To make do, they need to kill each tainted individual. Magnus talks about their choices with Rose, who figures killing the tainted ones will do nothing, so she'll work with Falmer to see as another option. Maybe Falmer can speak with the spore like Boz does and make sense if they could participate as opposed to going after one another. In the pit, Boz faculties the spore is closing him out and another seismic tremor raises a ruckus around town. Falmer utilizes a little plant to interface with Boz and sees the spores are attempting to set off the following incredible slide to clean the sea off. Rose brings up that the spore's a living organization strung all through the ocean bottom from one side of the planet to the other, so going after it here will scarcely hurt it. She figures they ought to converse with Boz and make it stop the spore through his bond. Magnus would prefer to collaborate with Coke to stop it, yet the others support Rose's hypothesis, and Magnus allows them to attempt. Magnus, Rose, and Falmer enter the pit, where Magnus continues to have dreams of his dead child. They find Boz crying in a haze of spore, saying it's past the point of no return, and that he fizzled. Coke searches for Harish, making sense of there are choppers previously coming, and that he'll bring Harish and his bow, assuming he assists him with completing his main goal. Harish suspects Coke needs to cause the apparatus to detonate to cover everything up, and he subtly initiates the mouthpieces prior to causing Coke to concede everything so that everybody might hear through the speakers. The quakes start deteriorating, and the entire structure starts breaking. Coke hits Harish to move him and begin the blast commencement, that is the second when the choppers at last connect with them. Coke takes off to the helideck to escape alone, and Feline and Heather pursue him while Easter assists Harish with halting the impending blast. At the helideck, Coke finds Lars sitting tight for him with the aim to kill him for vengeance, yet the young ladies show up with perfect timing to stop him. Harish appears at declare he halted the blast, so presently everybody requirements to prepare to clear, and Lars punches Coke prior to joining the group. In the pit, Rose sees the spore acting in an unexpected way, so she contacts it. She figures out how to speak with the spore yet before she can request that it help out humankind, the apparatus is hit by the most terrible tremor yet, and the folks drag her out. Boz chooses to remain behind to demonstrate to the spore that people are fit for giving as well. Magnus, Rose, and Falmer get the last helicopter, and they fly away just before a torrent stirs things up around town, bringing it down simultaneously. Boz becomes one with the spore. Feline notification: the tidal wave will raise a ruckus around town and needs to caution the residents, yet the pilots drive her away as Coke makes sense of they aren't returning home. At that point, the torrent raises a ruckus around town and kills Feline's significant other,